Welcome everybody to this week's Sick Society. Today, Alexis and I are going to be focusing on exercise and health. And to help us explore that topic, we've got Jon Houghton, who is a sports and exercise physician and works with many professional sports people, both in football, cricket. But Jon, perhaps you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bod. So I trained in Northwest Thames and I studied rheumatology and general medicine, but was always sort of fascinated in sport, really from my own personal experience. And when I got to consultant level in rheumatology, I had the opportunity to go and work with the military at a place called Headley Court, which at the time was the Services Tertiary Rehabilitation Centre. That was my first consultant job working there, looking after sort of fourth generation, i.e. musculoskeletal injury for the armed forces, but also complex trauma rehabilitation from the Afghan conflict. So worked in a really inspiring environment for about 7 or 8 years. Liked it so much that I joined the army, did a short service commission, and then sort of that gave me other opportunities later in that career to work in professional sport. And I guess for the last 12, 13 years, been working in professional sport, looking after a number of clubs and consulting, as well as sort of private practice, mainly for people who are either fit and healthy or want to become fit and healthy, but mainly people with musculoskeletal problems. And the whole baseline premise of what I do is really about keeping people active. So advising on injury, a little bit about prevention of injury, but primarily enabling people with injuries to get back to physical activity.
You both said muscular skeletal. Can you tell us a bit more what that means for those that might not know?
Yeah, I guess it's a sort of doctor way of saying, instead of respiratory medicine, so lungs or cardiac medicine for heart, musculoskeletal really refers to muscles, tendons, bones, ligaments, but it's the non-surgical part of that. The surgical would be orthopedics primarily, and sports physicians mainly deal, we're physicians, we're not surgeons, but we deal with all the injuries to those bits that don't need surgery, if that makes sense.
And I think you probably undersold yourself a bit because you're sort of lead medic for Wales Cricket Club and you had a lot to do with professional sport. So you're a modest man, but I think for the audience, you know your beans. But you have triggered me. You've mentioned Headley Court. And when I was at school, our cross-country route used to take us past the outside walls of Headley Court.
Oh, wow.
And it was sort of about 3/4 into the run, by which time you were sort of knee-deep in mud, knackered. And at that point in my life, I wasn't particularly fit. So generally, I walked past it rather than ran past it. But then it's interesting that I then discovered sport when I was at university, really. And I sort of became fitter and then really began to enjoy sport. So if you were somebody who perhaps is listening to this, who hasn't really had a good experience with sport in their school life, but they feel they need to get a bit fitter for whatever reason, what would your advice be to someone sort of just starting out on the exercise journey?
Yeah, it's a good question, Bod. And I think, for some people, sport at school was not a good experience. I think we were kind of split into those that loved team sport and loved various sports, and then others that just hated PE and it just wasn't their thing. And I think this really gets to the crux of the matter with anything to do with exercise and health, is that you need to choose something that you enjoy. Because like all habits, if you don't enjoy it and you're not engaged in that process, then it's highly likely to fail. So I think that we should also get really into the concept of exercise as being anything that is physical rather than just sports. So that can include walking, hiking, dancing, DIY, anything that is getting your heart rate up a little bit or creating some sort of resistance, muscle resistance, can be seen as exercise, and all of them have significant health benefits. So I think question number one is, what do you enjoy doing? And then sort of working from there, really.
We're talking in January. Obviously, there's a lot of New Year, New You resolutions happening at the moment. People getting moving. Though if the lineup at my local chippy on Friday, of which I was part of the line, I have to say, is any indication that most people in my neighborhood made it to January 23rd where they gave up. But what do you think it would be the best way for people to decide what trend they're going to look at? Or is it more about figuring out what you most enjoy?
I think definitely what you enjoy, but also there are multiple ways to do this. I think that a lot of people choose the easiest thing and they just say, well, I'm going to pick up running. And for some people, that's a great decision. For others, not such a good decision, because certainly if you've never run in your life and you have other health conditions, etc., then there are some risks to injury, which then stops people from wanting to carry on, and they feel deflated and sort of give up a little bit. So I think for some people, running is an excellent way because it's cheap, it's easy, and you can just get out there. I think just moving more is the first thing. And that might be, if your commute involves a car journey and a train or a bus, then choose a part of that journey that you're just going to walk every day and start that process just so you're moving more. Or, is there a part of that journey that you could cycle, for example? And these are really simple, cheap, easy ways to start moving. I think similarly now, there's multiple access to classes, gyms, and again, try and find the environment that you're going to feel comfortable with. There is, high intensity CrossFit gyms that people in their 20s, early 30s is a great buzz. For people who are maybe a little bit new to exercise, that might be a little bit overwhelming, and it might be going and joining a local class, which might be Pilates or body pump or similar. And I think sometimes if you're someone who enjoys company and socializing, then joining a local class is a really good way to encourage peer support and longevity of doing that activity. So it's a little bit about what you are like as an individual. If you're someone who just wants a bit of time in your head, then cycling, running might be the right thing for you.
And there's been a lot the past few years about resistance exercise. And it used to be that, we didn't really think about grip strength as doctors. But now one of the sort of the leading things that geriatricians sort of look at is they do test for grip strength. It's a good marker of frailty and how well older people are going to do. So what's more important, exercise just doing something, or should we specifically try and be doing more resistance stuff?
So resistance stuff is basically anything that is getting muscles working. So you're pushing against something or pulling something or gripping something. So that can be typical resistance machines in the gym. It can be body weight resistance exercises, press ups, sit ups, burpees, star jumps, etc. It can be lifting dumbbells, barbells, anything really that is getting muscles working against something. And you're absolutely right, Bod, that strength and resistance training has got a lot more interesting recently, because there's a lot more data to say what the significant health benefits are. The grip strength is basically used as a proxy of your global strengths, and it's got very, very good relationship with morbidity and mortality. So, if your grip strength is weaker, then that has an effect on longevity and risk going forward of death, which is fascinating. Doesn't mean we can all just go out and get those little things that just do the grip
I just
only.
have the image of everyone just squeezing those things. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's an excellent proxy for what your strength is. And that becomes really important later in life, more to do with activities of daily living, which is why the geriatricians have got really interested in it. Because if you are significantly weak, then that is going to increase your risk of falls. If you fall, are you able to get yourself up, for example? So if you can't, then that's another significant risk. So strength is one of those things that has gathered a lot of momentum recently, and actually, is sort of part of the chief medical officer's recommendations now for adults, whereas previously it didn't used to be. I think the way I normally explain this to people who are coming to me, and they might be 40, 50 years old, they're not massively into sport, but they're keen to do things. And they're saying to me, what's safe? What should I do? What should I choose? And I sort of say, well, think of it as from a financial perspective. If you've got a portfolio of investments, you want to spread your risk and have a portfolio of things. And exercise is exactly the same. So you should be doing some exercise that is related to cardiovascular exercise. And that would be low level cardio, non-impact, for example, or low impact. So walking, cycling, swimming. You might then choose a cardio that's a bit more high intensity, cycling, running, sports. You then need to put some strength and resistance work into your portfolio, which might be body weight, gym, class. And then also you need to do some balance and proprioception work, which is all about how you are moving in the world and using sight and sound and your proprioception to know what your body's doing, so you improve your balance and your movement. And then similarly, some flexibility work or sort of low-level stability work, and that might be yoga, Pilates, or similar type of exercise. So it's thinking about having a portfolio and thinking, how am I going to put my time and energy into a number of these pockets? Because if you just focus on one, not only do you increase your risk of injury for that particular thing, but you reduce your overall benefit in terms of health, longevity, and risk reduction.
I'm exhausted now, Jon. I think about all of the
just thinking
all of my
about it.
portfolios that I've got to put together here. Though I think Bod knows I'm not always the best poster child for exercise and good eating. I shocked him in another episode by saying I'd had a McDonald's breakfast. What struck me when you were talking was that we do focus on sports in schools. Now, whether we do the right thing or enough of it, I think that's something that we should talk about with you as well. But yes, where I'm going with this is that we have a focus on knowing that these types of activities are important in early life. Then there's this period of life where we're kind of adults and we're left to our own devices on what that might look like. But then, as you were saying, we now know there's such an importance in later life in focusing on these activities. And yet the availability seems less. If you're in later life, if you have the money to be part of a gym or money to be part of a class, then it's available. Whereas, when you're younger, it was just wrapped into your overall education. And I just wondered what your thoughts are on whether we need to be thinking more about how we provide free and available activities for people in later life so that we can continue on that benefit that you were talking about of being active.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're quite a lot younger than I am. I'm probably closer to Bod. And certainly when we were at school, PE was that was a common occurrence. I think that a lot of schools do a lot less physical education now, although things have started to maybe turn around. I think that encouraging younger children, especially, to exercise is really important. And I think, one of my favorite health initiatives was a head teacher at a primary school in Scotland, in Stirling. So this was probably 10 years ago. And she just realized that the kids were not as active. And so the whole school, every day, Monday to Friday, would have 15 minutes of activity that they all did together around the sort of perimeter of the school grounds. And it kind of became known as the Daily Mile, because most people traveled about a mile in that 15 minutes. And the beauty of that project was that it was very encompassing. They were allowed to cycle it, run, walk, do whatever they wanted to, but it was done as a school. And then Stirling and Edinburgh University sort of took the program. It got quite a bit of media attention, and now it's done in over sort of 25 countries and has expanded hugely. And they show good benefits in terms of health, academic performance, and general well-being for the kids. So I think it's those early experiences are really, really important. The interesting thing about the data is that you would think that those early experiences have a massive influence on what people do as adults. And I think it's good news and bad news. What the data seems to suggest, there is some correlation if you do quite a lot of activity when you're younger as to how active you are as an adult. It tends to be more those that are involved in team sports that has the strongest correlation. And there are some obvious reasons for that, I think. But it's not a given. And so a lot of people kind of fall out of things in that period just after school. And certainly there is that period in your life as a young adult where you're trying to get on with your career, your studies, whatever, and maybe physical activity becomes less important. But I think it's good news and bad news, because it doesn't mean that, if you hated PE when you were young, that you can't actually get on and really love sport and activity as an adult. As Bod said, it wasn't really his thing when he was a kid at school, and now it's a really big part of his life. So I think it's never too late is the key thing. But I still believe that encouraging children to move more and be active and use activity as a social part of their life will lead to significant benefits, both in their health then and transfer across to some of their beliefs and ideas as an adult.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been slightly disappointed by sort of the selling off of school playing grounds to build on. And I accept that, it creates money and that allows other development. And, clearly with social media and phones, and there's a lot of debate at the moment about, do we ban social media for kids under 16? And then the knock-on effect that, they won't have phones perhaps as much. So that might allow them more time to be outside. Not bragging here, but when I was out running yesterday, personal best for my 5K, which is good. I was happy with that. I was running past some friends, and they've got sort of a house on the outskirts of our village with a big field outside. And the kids who are 4 and 5 were just running around this field screaming. And I was thinking, that's brilliant. They're not inside. They're not watching telly, but they're lucky. We live in a rural village, but if you're stuck in a inner city town, it's much, much harder, because we really restricted the spaces that we have available to us. And I think that modern city planners and town planners do need to think about that. I think that's important. But also when we're building new schools, which we will need as we build more houses, we've got to give lots of space for sport. So a question that's been sort of bugging me a lot recently has been sort of the relationship between exercise and weight loss. Talking about the January thing of people wanting to sort of come afresh into exercising more. And many people do that, not because they have a specific thinking where I'm going to exercise more, that's going to be better my health. And we know that. And perhaps you could talk a bit about sort of the direct link between exercise and activity and health. But also, I'm going to lose weight. And my understanding is always going to be that you won't lose weight if you carry on eating as you have been and try and exercise a bit more. You're very unlikely to lose weight. But if you diet and exercise at the same time, you'll get a better benefit than if you just dieted alone. But I've sort of slightly had that turned on its head by some of the stuff I've been reading recently by Chris Van Tulliken, who sort of says, no, exercise really hasn't got any part to play in weight loss. I was left with a bit of a down feeling from that. What's your view on exercise and weight loss?
Yeah, I mean, I've read some of the Chris Van Tulliken's thoughts on that, and I think it is a little extreme, I must admit. And some of the stuff he's been doing is fantastic. It's funny though, because I only remember him and his twin brother in Operation Ouch for when my kids were really young, so that's how I still see him. But they're doing some great work. I think the problem is that weight loss alone is too narrow an outcome measure, because I'll talk about it in two terms. Probably the first term in terms of health risk reduction is that we know that if you have obesity, that's very bad for your health. We know that the health risks go up hugely. However, there are some people who still hit criteria for obesity, but are relatively fit cardiovascularly. So they are maybe playing a sport that does involve them, where having some weight is good for them. And we know that the data suggests that if you are overweight but have a good VO2 max, your cardiovascular reserve, that massively reduces your health risks. So you can be overweight but be cardiovascularly fit and improve your health. So I think Excellent. That's point number one. Point number two, what I would say is, again, if you take, let's say you've got a guy who is 6 foot tall and he weighs 95 kilos to 100 kilos. So, he's overweight via, the various measures that we use. And let's say he starts exercising and continues the same diet. What you might find is that he might stay at 95 kilos, but his body composition will improve considerably. So, your fat-free mass will go up, so your muscle volume will go up, which has benefits for your basal metabolic rate. The amount of visceral fat will come down, which has massive effects on cardiovascular risk and risk of type 2 diabetes. His waist measurement might come down by 4 or 5 inches. So I think just thinking about weight loss is too narrow a way of looking at things. I think body composition is just as important, if not more important, and all the other markers of cardiovascular health. So clearly, if weight loss is the only goal, then I would sort of agree with Chris in saying you massively have to change your diet. You have to take out the ultra processed foods, etc. But for me, I think the combination of exercise and more healthy eating will give you a much, much better long-term outcome. It may lead to some weight loss, but it will improve your fitness and your risk of developing other diseases. And, from that perspective, I think weight loss is just too narrow to look at on its own.
I mean, one of the things that worries me when we start talking about these things is how people can get very single-minded or almost obsessed with making sure they're doing, eating the right food, for example, and cutting out all those things. And then I think that's how we end up with the scenario of my Friday night chippy lineup, is that it's only sustainable for so long because it's new, B, because people often go far too one way in the extreme on these things. And so how do we find that happy medium with not just food, but exercise, right? When we think about some people, what are they called? Weekend warriors, the ones that really hit it hard on the weekend. And yeah, I just wonder about how we find an even balance of the right ways to exercise and to eat healthily.
I think people have just got to not be quite so harsh on themselves. And we're all quite introspective sometimes when we're thinking about these things. When people sort of say, I really need to start exercising, or I really need to tidy up my diet, there's clearly something that they don't like about themselves, or there is some trigger to that they want to improve. And I mean, I find it myself personally that whenever I am in a space where I'm making time to spend more time on exercise and I feel fitter, I find it so much easier to eat healthily, which is bizarre because when I'm injured or I've got some issue where I can't exercise, psychologically we almost go, oh, well, it's not worth it. So, I'll eat more unhealthily during those periods, which is the time when actually you could help yourself by eating more healthily. I mean, I think that it's all about, again, trying to find a bit of a balance. And when I was talking about the portfolio, we don't all have to be in the gym doing 90 minutes of high intensity exercise every single day and not eating any ultra processed foods. Clearly, food is there to be enjoyed to some degree. Similarly with alcohol, it's all about having a balance of these things and not being too harsh on yourself. There are simple ways to change your nutrition, and I'm sure you've spoken about this on other podcasts. I think the food companies have some responsibility on this, and I would wager that the vast majority of us would be very bad in a lineup of just pulling out 10 things from a supermarket and saying how much fat has that got, how much protein, how much processed food. I think even people that are really interested in it probably don't have a great handle on it, which is very, very difficult. So food is a really complex one, but it's more about if you are active and you're eating healthy 5 days a week, there are times when you can have some fish and chips, you can have a pizza. Don't be too hard on yourself is the bottom line.
And you could be balanced at the weekend. So particularly with alcohol, so I make sure I have the same amount of red wine that I do of white wine. And I feel that works well. And you talked about sort of body composition. So, and there are some adverts on the telly at the moment and in the papers about clever scales that will tell you what's happening with your body composition. Do they work? And how do they work? And should we all get one? And you don't have shares in them, I presume.
Yeah, no, I don't have any shares in them. I mean, there are different ways of doing it. They primarily use impedance to work out what's fat, what's water, what's tissue, etc. Some of them are pretty good. And if you as an individual like to see, if you like data and you like regular feedback, then it can be very, very helpful. Other people find that really a turn off. They don't want to step on the scales every week. And I would say those people need to just go and find things to move and enjoy themselves. What you will find is that people, certainly in London, where I work, there are a number of companies that for not a great amount of money will do a body composition DEXA scan, which is probably the best available method. It's a very quick scan. It only takes a couple of minutes, and it will look at X-ray absorbed geometry, so dual energy, and it can tell you what your global bone density is across the whole body. It'll tell you visceral fat, how much muscle, upper body, lower body. And we're talking about maybe, somewhere between 100 and 150 pounds for that sort of analysis. And certainly what I've done over the years, I might go every couple of years and just do that, and you keep a record of that. And it's a very good way of getting an overall view of worrying things like visceral fat, but also bone density.
With the NHS 10-year plan, one of the things that was put in its first draft was talking about wearables. And you can buy all sorts of tech these days to help you exercise or support your exercise and activity. If, and you say some people are interested in, love data and they'll collect that, and that's what they do that for. Is there any evidence that that is useful for the majority of people?
I would say that, again, it comes down to a very individual thing. So I quite like data and numbers. So I used to have quite a lot of wearable tech. I've sort of grown out of it. That's a little personal thing. I had atrial fibrillation a couple of years back, which means that the electrics on my heart were a little bit wavy. And it meant that each time I had a glass of wine or tried to do some exercise, I went into an abnormal rhythm. Now, that's not great in the long term, and it's one of the things that for people older than me can be a serious health problem. And for about probably 12 months, I was unable to do any high intensity exercise, which was very difficult. Wasn't able to drink any alcohol, which was equally difficult. And it meant that all of my wearables were a little bit up the spout. Had a procedure, solved the problem, but that actually led to something called heart rate variability, which is one of the big holy grails of this sort of exercise, being completely flat because of the procedure. So I don't wear my wearable now because the data's useless. And do I feel better for it? Maybe I was a bit too obsessed with looking at it and focusing on it. But I think that it's all down to an individual basis. If the feedback is good for you and it is a way of external validation or support, then that's great. I think that can be really, really helpful. We know that some sort of feedback for people is good. So if they see their resting heart rate coming down or their volume of exercise going up, that encourages them and gives them a little bit of a fillip and push them forward. For other people, the data can be a bit too intimidating to start with. So I think that tech and wearables have a big role to play as an external validator. But does everybody need it? No, not at all.
This conversation's also made me think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Jon, because you've been working in this field for a really long time. But of course, the things that we do for exercise and health change over time, right? There's trends, people get more interested or less interested in different things. And even body size and body composition, there are trends within that and what's considered appropriate or not. And I'd really love to hear kind of your thoughts on, the trends over the last few years of what do you think's been going on there? Where do you think we're going?
I think the clear sort of direction of travel, I would say in a big group of the population, people who are sort of interested in health to some degree, the direction of travel is longevity, most definitely. And that's sort of something that we've not really talked about before. And some of that is prevention of disease, which is a really important topic. But also, I'm a big fan of a guy called Peter Attia, who's a physician in the US. He's got a huge sort of podcast following. He wrote a fantastic book, which I think I have to remember the title, but it's all about longevity. And one of the really lovely things that I think he put into that book was something called the centenarian decathlon. And really he was saying, look, we're all living longer and that's a good thing. But a problem with this is that most people in the last decade of their life, their quality of life is very poor. And that's primarily because of a lack of physical health. So he's a big proponent of improving things like cardiovascular health, what we were talking a little bit earlier, resistance training, flexibility, mobility, stability, all of those things, as well as maximal VO2 max, as well as our sort of more what we call zone 2 cardiovascular fitness, which is more the ability to keep doing things at a low level for a period of time. And so he came up with this centenarian decathlon, which was very much part of write down 5 things that are activities of daily living that are really important to you that you want to be able to do in your 80s, 90s, up to the age of 100, and 5 activities that you want to be able to do. And that might be being able to lift a suitcase up to an aeroplane to put your luggage on so that you can travel. That might be being able to sit on the floor, play with my grandkids, great-grandkids, and then be able to get up without assistance. And in terms of, I want to be able to walk 2 miles a day on this sort of incline around where I want to retire to. So it's very much focused on what do I need to do now, whether I'm 40, 50, 60, to be able to achieve that, because we know that physical fitness will come down naturally. So we have to get pretty high levels in our 40s, 50s to be able to achieve that when we're 80, 90. But I love his approach of what he calls the marginal decade, the last 10 years of life where our physical health is not as good as it should be. And we're all living longer, but that quality is just not there. So for me, that's a really good way of sort of focusing the mind on what you want and how you get there.
So my great grandmother, so she lived to be 95, 96, I believe, with no real health complications or anything. And she used to do this really hilarious thing. I thought it was hilarious, but listening to you talk, I realized this is exactly what she was doing. So we have a cottage on one of the Great Lakes in Canada that she grew up in. Was a little set of stairs that took you from the cottage down the beach to the lake. And even in her 90s, she would put her swimsuit on, and then she would say, I'm going to dip my toes in the lake. And that's all she did. She walked down the stairs and she walked across the beach and she just put her toes in the water. She wouldn't actually go for a swim, but she'd put her toes in the water and then she'd come back and she would do it every day. And listening to you talk about that, I realized that, of course, there's so many different activities that in doing that process allowed her to live the kind of life that she had. So she could go up and down stairs. She could navigate an uneven surface like the sand. She could walk the distance that was required to the water edge. So it's it doesn't have to be very big things, does it, to keep that activity going?
No, not at all. It doesn't have to be big, but you have to plan now, because if you are in your 50s and 60s and your cardiovascular reserve and your strength is not that great, then we know that as each year goes on, we lose strength, we lose VO2 max. And so you will start to exclude yourself from those activities, maybe at 65, maybe at 70, maybe at 75. So it's more about planning for the future. And you've got to kind of almost top up the tank now to be able to do all those things.
So now's the time to all of our listeners who are in their 40s and 50s. Absolutely. Now's the time to make your, what is it, the centenarian
decathlon
Absolutely.
List. Make your 10.
Excellent.
I was reading this morning about the Brewdog founder, can't remember his name, who is quite obsessed with trying to live as long as possible. He's sort of in the Jeff Bezos, I want to make it to 150 mile, or Putin doing the same, and goes into a hyperbaric chamber once a week or whatever. And I'm thinking, that's interesting. A, expensive, and B, does it really make any difference? I think just getting people moving is the start of it all, and moving more and doing the things you enjoy, rather worrying too much about other things.
So you touch on something here, because we talk a lot about not just health, John, but, society and the world around us and how that influences on health. And as we've been talking about all the things that we can do, especially as we move into later life, I've also been keeping a bit of a running tab of the costs of that. And it's not cheap, right? It's not cheap if you want to have a wearable, for example, if you want to be part of a gym, if you want to have the Jazzy scan that you were talking about every couple of years. We know that healthy food costs more than unhealthy food for the most part. And of course, where you live limits how safe you might feel doing more free activities. So if you live in an area where you don't feel comfortable walking or running in that neighborhood, then you're not very likely to do so. And equally, if you can't afford to live in a house that has a garden, if you live in a block of flats or a tower of flats, then that limits, as Bod was saying, where your 4 and 5-year-olds run around. So there is something too that we have to think about how, as a society, if we want to promote longevity, if we want to promote good health into our old age, and this is quite important because here in Britain, while we are, actually, for the first time ever, we're not living as long as the generations before us, but we are most part living longer, but we're living longer in ill health. And where you are on the sort of financial spectrum is very indicative of this. So for people living a relatively well-off life, they'll live into old age with relatively few other illnesses, maybe one chronic illness or one old age related illness. When you get to the lower end of the poverty scale, we're talking about 2/3 to 75% of the population living with at least 2 chronic illnesses into their old age. So while we have this focus and this interest across society about living healthier longer, we seem to have missed a crucial step, which is putting in infrastructure that allows everyone to access those types of activities that they need in order to live that way, right? And Bod, when you were saying, the Jeff Bezos of the world, we are creating a bit of a divide, right? It's getting a little sci-fi. It's like, do you have the money for a hyperbaric chamber? Can you shoot your blood into space and then put it back in your body or whatever it is that he does? Putin's got like unicorns on tap. God knows how much that costs, but we can joke, but actually a lot of this is premised on your ability to have the resources to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think health inequalities, this is nothing new in terms of, we're talking about exercise here, but even before exercise was remotely trendy and if anyone was talking about exercise and health, that all of those health inequalities existed across the social classes because more likely to smoke, more likely to drink more alcohol, more likely to have an unhealthy diet. And so those are societal and governmental challenges, definitely. And you're absolutely right that with people living longer, carrying those 2 or 3 chronic diseases, they might be starting to live with those at the age of 35 or 40, type 2 diabetes, for example. And they might be spending 30 years of their life that is poor quality in some regards from a health perspective. And I think that, a lot of this then comes down to governments of the day making decisions around how do you improve the long-term health. And Bod will know this very well, that it comes down a lot to politics. And it's very difficult for a government of the day to invest huge amounts of money into something that might bring significant health benefits and benefits the NHS in 20 to 30 years' time, because that is not going to win them votes at that time. I mean, I don't want to make it too much of a political thing, but I've always...
We do that all the time, John, so you go for it.
I mean, I've always felt that, health should always sort of come out of the decision making. It shouldn't be party politics. It should be cross-party and have, health specialists and have access to the right people that can design policies that are going to improve the health of that particular nation, rather than it being down to an individual making a decision. We all know from a political perspective that the MP, where a hospital closes in their area, they're going to lose that seat at the next general election. So there are some really uncomfortable decisions to be made about how we use our resources. But you are absolutely right in terms of those that have the least will suffer the most. And I think that there are ways that you can do it for not so much money. You don't need a DEXA. You can measure your waist. You can see physical changes. You can feel better on exercise. You can be less breathless, etc. And that is the beauty of exercise. There are still quite a lot of opportunities that do not cost money, but there are some people who really enjoy spending their resources on enjoying their health, and that's a real priority to them. I've not mentioned it as yet, but one of the massive things that the Faculty of Sport and Exercise Medicine has done over the last decade is, with a number of other collaborators, the Moving Medicine Project, which is a fantastic resource for patients, healthcare workers, GPs. And it's all about how do we start a conversation with people who are not used to exercise or want to exercise. And yeah, if you go on their website, it's fantastic now. It's sort of got like a 1-minute consultation, a 5-minute consultation if you're a healthcare professional. It's got resources for individual patients that you can search up local resources where you might be able to access free activities or support groups that are local to you where you can get information from. So I'd really encourage any healthcare worker that's listening to this to have a look at that Moving Medicine website, because people come to healthcare workers with these sorts of questions saying, how can I do this? Will it improve my health, etc.? And it's a fantastic resource.
When I sort of learned more about Moving Medicine, the impact of increasing activity when somebody has a condition of any system virtually, there are positive benefits. I mean, as a physician, I'm used to expecting people after a heart attack to then go for cardiac rehabilitation, and know that people with really bad emphysema can benefit from pulmonary rehabilitation, and that's all good. But actually, for most conditions that you'll end up seeing a specialist for, increasing your activity is as good as many medicines. Exercise is the best medicine. So, I think we sometimes, when we're sitting in our clinic rooms, we forget that because we're focused on some fancy new drug, and sometimes the simple things are probably as good as anything.
100%. I mean, I think in the world that I move in for 20, 25 years, have known that the benefits of exercise are enormous, and in multiple fields, like you say, multiple cancers where you can reduce your risk, improve your recovery, mental health, and dementia is a really key one. You kind of asked, what are the trends? Where are we going? That's a really big health challenge now, mental health and dementia. And exercise has a huge amount of evidence for treating those conditions, almost equal, as Bod said, to taking an antidepressant for certain anxiety, depression, etc., reducing risk of dementia, preventing frailty, all of those really, really important things. And so I think even as doctors, one of the things that we saw was that people were coming to doctors saying, well, look, I've got this condition, I've got type 2 diabetes, I've got obesity. Is it safe for me to do this? And a lot of doctors don't know. They don't have that knowledge or education. And that's where Moving Medicine has tried to push people, because there's pretty much not a single condition other than probably atrial fibrillation, which I have, that exercise slightly increases your risk. Pretty much everything else, it can improve your health, improve your longevity, reduce your use of medications. And it's all about having specialists available who can look at all of the risks and say, okay, that's not the right choice for you, but we can do this, or we can do that. And I still think that that's a real missing piece of medical education, that we're too risk averse.
Do we need sort of a new class of health professional, sort of in the same way that when I go to the dentist, I see the dentist and then I go and see the hygienist? And I don't know whether I go to see the hygienist because it then makes me feel better about going to see the dentist, because the dentist is always nicer to me. But if people want advice, is worth going to a pharmacy? Is that the right thing? We don't want GPs to be overburdened with people coming for advice on exercise, but actually you do need sort of ongoing support as you do stuff. And you'll get injuries, things will happen, and having a group of people who are easily accessible. Is AI an answer here? If you have a chatbot?
I think AI is definitely, it's here to stay, and it's pretty good at summarizing a lot of things. I'm always a little bit cautious because I now get patients emailing me saying, oh, I've put this into AI and it said this, but you said that. You do still need specialists, but sport and exercise medicine professionals are there really to help other doctors, either primary care physicians, orthopedics, etc. And we're still a relatively small specialty, and I think disappointingly the take up within the NHS has been relatively small. But again, some of that comes down to resources and politics. I think that most pharmacists, those that are interested, will have some knowledge, those that don't won't. But we need to be pushing the agenda with all healthcare professionals to have some knowledge of the benefits of exercise and the sort of advice that they can give. But can't say it enough, the Moving Medicine website, any healthcare professional can look on that, or non-professional, and get really, really good advice on simple things that they can recommend to patients or the general population.
So, Alexis, you've been listening to all of this between two sporty people. What's your February resolution going to be?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't really do resolutions, and my activity of choice is dance. It always has been. And the only thing that limits me at the moment is having two small kids to do the amount of dance that I would actually like to do. But in September last year, I decided I was going to join I was going to say an adult dance group, but that's not how
Comes
that's not
across.
what I mean. Like, for people over the age of 18. Anyway, and it's not a pole dancing class, I swear. And that has had such a positive impact on me to be able to go and move and dance to music that I enjoy and be with people that I enjoy. We're all women of kind of a similar age group with smaller kids, and it did reinforce to me how important it is to find those things that you love to do and to take the time for yourself. And so I guess I don't have a February resolution in the sense that I want to carry on what I have been doing, which is continuing to go to my dance classes and enjoy that. I'm a big fan of high intensity interval training. I just love it. I just love that I can get so much done in half an hour. And I do really enjoy weightlifting, but at the moment the weight section, this happens every January. I just give it a little pause while everybody gets it out of their systems. And then I go back and carry on with my usual routine. I think the more the merrier at the gym, right? Like, it's not about, oh, well, the regulars. It's not that. I can't bear to see the people who come and do some very odd things. It distracts me the whole time. I'm like, please don't fall. Please don't fall. Please don't, don't drop that plate on your head. Don't drop that plate on your head. So I just give it a wide berth in January now. But, no, I mean, this has really made me think more about that decathlon, actually. I take so much of my activity for granted, but I have noticed since turning 40 that my youngest is only 2.5 years old, so I had a geriatric pregnancy, as they call it, and just, like, getting up and down off the floor has gotten just a little bit harder. And recently, I have started thinking, "Okay, how do I do exercises to make that better?" And so it was actually quite affirming to hear you 2 talk about the importance of getting those types of activities in and getting moving. Will I run, Bod? I mean,
I think what John was saying before we started recording was that, we're not all designed to run.
I'm designed for famine. That's what I've decided my body type is for, famine and nuclear disaster.
Yeah.
I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Yeah. No, I mean, everyone always says you'll hit your stride as well, right? And a couple of years ago, I was gonna raise money for Cancer UK. They do a run every day, 100 miles in July campaign. And stupidly, I just, like, woke up on July 1st, John, and I'd figured out I needed to run 3 miles on weekdays and 5 miles on the weekend, and I just ran 3 miles. I was an absolute wreck. That I showed up at this conference just, like, and I never hit my stride. I always looked awful. I made my 100 miles, but man, did I work for it.
Yeah. And it's just about saying to people that to get fitter, you don't have to take up running. Because as I said to Bod there, I see plenty of people that aren't really designed to run. There are plenty of ways to improve your fitness. And Bod spoke earlier about resistance training and the gym. And we've talked a little bit about risk. And I think that one of the things that a lot of people think is that I can't do strength training. It will damage me. It's too risky. And certainly a lot of doctors don't prescribe it or recommend it. But I think, one of my favorite studies ever was something called the Lift More study done in Australia. So this was about 8 years ago. And they took a bunch of postmenopausal women with osteopenia, osteoporosis, so thin bones. And they basically did a randomized controlled trial where they had two groups. There was one group that did 2 30-minute sessions of low intensity exercise, either supervised or themselves, which they designed. And then the other group had 2 30-minute sessions with a physiotherapist, personal trainer, trained in weightlifting. So, and we're talking barbell, proper weights. And they did this over a period of months and showed that in the lifting group, there was one person, I think, across hundreds that had a back spasm, which settled down very quickly, but they showed significant improvements in bone density in those postmenopausal women who did resistance training. And again, what they're proving is that if you've got an environment with trained people who can show you how to lift properly and show you how to do exercise safely, then it's incredibly safe. And, these are people who have the more brittle bones. So I think a lot of doctors would go, oh, no, you shouldn't do that. You might fracture something. But the evidence is the absolute opposite.
And I have to say, that's one of the societal trends that I really enjoy, that there's been a big push for women to lift more, lift heavier. It's become very trendy on social media. But as someone who has got into that years ago, it is, I think, really beneficial. And I have to say, we keep coming back to this idea of just do the stuff that you enjoy. And that's one of the reasons why I keep coming back to it. I enjoy the incremental moving up. Like, if you feel like you're slowly succeeding at something, which is always good. I enjoy the sense of feeling powerful and strong, going and lifting 50, 60, 70 kilos of weight. I like that I can do that. And it's really important that we embrace some of those trends so that we get the best of all the worlds, right? So the weightlifting trend is built around a few different things in society. So one is about breaking through an invisible wall in the gym where men were in the weight training area and women were on the treadmill. So that's part of what's happening there, is a pushing through of gender stereotypes. Then we also have to admit that part of why weight training has become very popular, in particular squats and deadlifts and things like that, is about a particular physique in women and men, about building different looks. But it's driving a trend towards weightlifting, which is probably for the best, since most of us are not going to end up with Kim Kardashian bones, no matter how much we squat. I know you have an excellent one, Bod, just excellent Kim Kardashian. Our listeners can't see it, but I just feel like we should put that out there. But then, it's all the other stuff too. And sometimes I think, this is going to sound really strange, but like exercise needs a PR campaign. Like, someone needs to go in with marketing and talk about all the different ways that aren't just, oh, well, you could lose weight. There's so much more available to it. It offers many things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think myself and Bod touched on, across every sphere of medicine, it has significant and sustainable benefits in disease reduction and prevention and management of disease. And even we as doctors are not good enough at recognizing that or building it into treatment plans. And certainly, when the specialty of sport and exercise medicine was born back in 2006, we're a really baby specialty, but
gosh, yeah, that is young.
These are the sort of foundation principles that we need to work on and push and enable people to find what they enjoy, to get into exercise, sort of break down what exercise means to individuals, but also educate both health professionals and the general public about the absolute myriad of health benefits that exercise has got.
I have a quick fire round for you, Jon.
Yeah.
Okay. Favorite exercise?
For me, it was football, now cycling.
Okay. Worst health trend?
Currently, or my worst health trend?
You could share both.
Oh, I'm going to be controversial, and I'm going to say stem cells.
Okay, interesting. I would not what I thought you were going to say at all. Okay. Most baffling social media health trend?
Oh, most baffling. I guess some of it is, like we were talking about earlier, what some people do in the gym, the scary things.
Yeah. Okay. And then, obviously, patient confidentiality, but weirdest injury you've ever encountered?
Yeah, I'm thinking about my days in casualty when I was at St Mary's, and a couple of Aussie guys who were, I think they were running away from either some bouncers or police. I can't remember the exact details. And they were running and then hurtling over into a park. And one of them slipped and went down on those sort of big, sort of like sword-like railings. And obviously the police caught up with him. And he was, then they had to call the fire brigade because the railing had gone all the way through his inner thigh. Hopefully won't upset too much people. It had gone through his scrotum and up through his abdomen. And he came into casualty laughing. He was still so drunk and unbelievably,
That's a blessing, I think.
They took him to theatre, were able to remove the whole thing, and he'd sort of missed his femoral artery by about an inch. He didn't actually penetrate the testicle. It had just gone through the scrotum. He missed all his major organs, went home the next day with a great, great story of his trip to the UK. So I think that's my most bizarre injury from any form of exercise.
I was not expecting that, Jon.
Yeah. But it's burnt into my memory. It was more him and his buddy still just laughing at the whole scenario when he should have died. And I'm hoping that he is now can run a mean 1500 and high jump. So
I was going to say, yeah. If there's a lesson for any of our listeners, it's make sure you can vault a park fence because you never know what might happen.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that seems like an excellent
I would stop there quickly.
This has been a Haunted Mouse production. Cut that out.